All right. Hi, guys, and thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to SAATH's first official podcast. For those of you who don't know or have just found us on the internet, I'll just give you a quick reminder or a new understanding of what SAATH is. So, like so many of us, on November 6th, I went to bed with kind of this pit in my stomach. I saw my home state of Georgia flip red, and from there, a lot of anxiety and unknown about what was to come next really started to consume me. And so I decided to call Bakil. He's a great friend of mine. We've worked together. We've had so many summers in DC. And it's from there that we realized that something has to be done. And it is from there that South arose.
Yeah, exactly. And especially as college students, we really saw a lot of political apathy on college campuses. And we kind of figured out that there was a lack of messaging towards the youth, specifically South Asian youths. A lot of our friends just felt like politics wasn't relatable, it wasn't really speaking to them. And that's where we kind of came in and we are like, we need to fill in this gap. We need to be able to create a way that we could like target a certain audience in South Asian youth and kind of talk to them in ways that they understand. And so that's kind of where our mission comes to educate and empower young South Asians on political engagement. And our goal is by the 2026 midterms to amplify South Asian representation in politics and also strengthen connections across diverse communities across our diaspora. And now, just to quickly introduce yourselves, my name is Akil, and I'm the co president and head of education here at SAATH.
My name is Rohan. I'm also the co-president and head of elections here at SAATH. And it's really important that we have South Asian representation in politics. You see, South Asian representation politics isn't just Vivek and Doge or Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard testifying about a botched Signal group chat. Often some of the most important and influential South Asian politics actually lean to the left and work within the Democratic Party. One of the most impactful and hardest working organizers that exist in this realm is Shasti Conrad, an unsung hero with a beautiful vision for the future of our party. Recently appointed as the associate chair of the Democratic National Committee, yes, the entire DNC, we know that Chair Conrad will use her expertise and vision to help improve the lives of Americans across the country through the Democratic Party's existing infrastructure. In this 2024 election, every single state trended to the right, except for one, the state of Washington. And Chair Conrad, being the chair of the Washington State Democratic Party, played a huge and unspeakable role in this. Prior to her role in the state of Washington, Chair Conrad worked in the Obama administration in a few roles, ranging from being a staff assistant in the Office of Public Engagement to being the executive assistant to the senior advisor to President Obama. Chair Conrad's experience is extensive, and she was also a graduate senior fellow at the Malala Fund. It's also with this exact and vast experience that we know she'll be able to help us make an impact, and we're so grateful to announce that Chair Shasti Conrad has officially joined the SAATH Board of Advisors. Thank you so much for joining us today, and SAATH as a whole, Chair Conrad. And we're super excited to talk to you as part of our series highlighting South Asians in politics.
Thanks for having me here and to be on the inaugural podcast is so exciting.
No, there's no one else we'd rather have to kick off our podcast series. So
Yeah, and thank you so much again for taking the time. I know you're extremely busy, so it means a lot to us. So to just kind of get us started, we would love to know more about the personal side of why you're in politics. So what inspired you to get into politics, and how has your South Asian identity shaped your journey?
Well, my connection to politics starts really young. I often joke I was kind of a weird kid who, even at like 5, 6 years old, was arguing with my preschool teachers about who to vote for and, that they weren't being fully represented by, George H.W. Bush and these people and Reagan and whatnot. And, that was in large part because, in my family, we talked a lot about civic engagement. There, you had a responsibility to serve, to take care of your community, to be there for other people. That's what, that's why we're all here, is to create community and to help people. And for me, I found a way to do that through politics and was always drawn into it because I think ultimately it's about helping people and about making sure that we're making people's lives better. And that's really been the sort of thread throughout my entire life. I am born in Calcutta, India, and I was adopted at 2 months old to the United States. I was raised in a predominantly white family, but my adoptive mom was very keen on making sure that I felt a connection to my South Asian heritage. And I grew up with books about India and about heroes from India, and a doll that looked like me, and all of those things to make sure that I felt that connection. And I think certainly when I look back at the, heroes from India, Mahatma Gandhi, obviously, but, there's so many incredible leaders and, you know, the largest democracy. And so there are those connections between the work that we do here in the United States and certainly what is built has been built in India. And I think that always plays a role in every room that I'm in. I walk in as a full, woman of color, full Indian woman in these spaces. And, I'm the first Indian woman to lead a state party in the entire country. And, certainly have done the work to try to sort of open the doors so that more people will come in behind me into these party spaces.
For me, it was also my kindergarten class election. It was Obama McCain, and I remember like there's a photo that my parents have of me on the kitchen wall, like the fridge, of just putting in my ballot for Obama, and I think that's what kind of jump started my career in politics as well. And it really is truly about service. Akil.
Yeah, I always was an argumentative kid, so I think that made politics, like, the perfect grounds to talk about. We used to have, like, intense arguments. I have, like, 2 older sisters, so one of us would, like, jump on the kitchen table while we're, like, doing, like, our nightly, like, dinner debates, and it's usually, like, politics, policy central, and so I think especially after the 2016 election, that was like, "Hey, I'm young. I need to do something," and seeing, people like you, where it's South Asians in politics is truly inspiring, and it shows that like, hey, we deserve to be in this country. We deserve to have representation in this country and make our voices heard. So thank you so much for being that representation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's like obviously like we all talk about elections in some way or another. Like for me, it was my 2008 kindergarten years. It was George Bush, and Akil, it's you 2016. But we kind of just came out of what is one of the most pivotal elections of our lifetime, right? The 2024 election is going to have consequences and effects that will last for however many years that we can fathom, right? But it's also important for us to analyze what went right. Specifically, what did Republicans get right, in your opinion, Chair Conrad, during this 2024 election, and what sort of lessons can we take as a Democratic Party from them?
hmm I'm not normally one who likes to talk about the Republicans as getting anything right because I generally, don't think that they do. But I think it is an important question and an important sort of space to look at. I think number one is that Republicans recognized faster and earlier than we did that people were no longer getting their news through traditional media. In previous cycles, it's like for the most part, everybody was reading, maybe the New York Times, they were getting their evening news, they were, mostly working with the same set of facts. And Republicans realize that that's not true. That's not the case. And that if you can get a hold of, the kind of influencer sphere, right? So like that's podcasts, that's Instagram influencers and TikTok influencers, all of those different voices. If you can flood those airwaves, people will get a lot of their information, and also they find people who match their mood and also direct how they're feeling about things and get their information. And the Republicans did a much better job of doing that than we did on our Democratic side. And I think that that is something, in the last few months since the November election, you're hearing both parties, but particularly Democrats, talking a lot about needing to make sure that we are talking about our message, that we are getting into these spaces, that we are doing these podcasts, that we are working with people to make sure that we're not letting Republicans define us, but that we are telling our own story and that we are uplifting other people's stories so that we can sort of combat a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that the Republicans are putting forward in a lot of these spaces. So I think that's like number one. I think number two, we were running on a lot of different messages and we weren't really owning our own victories. And again, we were letting Republicans define the framework with which we were trying to exist in. And Trump doesn't have to have policy, right? He wasn't running on policy. What he was running on is you're mad, I'm mad, we're mad, we can be mad together. And he was able to understand and hit the sort of cultural rage that is happening right now as people feel frustrated and let down by institutions and systems and whatnot. And I think as Democrats, we so often get caught up in wanting to prove our point by, launching very rational, logical, discussions about, hey, okay, unemployment has been down. We've had some of our best unemployment numbers, for years. But if people felt like, or they were seeing that there were people who were struggling to get jobs, or they were feeling like that was the case, then it didn't matter if we quoted, facts and figures at them. They still felt like the country wasn't coming back in the way in which they wanted it to, and that they were not doing as well as they feel like they should do. And we as Democrats, I think, need to sometimes just be able to say, like, we hear you, we feel it, we get it, and be real, be authentic in it. Like, be mad, show our emotions, be sad, be angry, whatever that might be, but not just try to push it down, or make people feel like that's silly that you feel that way, because in actuality you should feel this way. So I think Republicans were able to do that, and I think that really connected with a lot of people and motivated them in a way that what we were sort of doing on our side of things, people weren't feeling as motivated to come out and support, because I really do think that the results are mostly a turnout issue. I really think that a lot of it is that we had more people stay home, and that was us not, activating those people, reaching them, making them feel compelled to come out and support, Kamala Harris. Then that's more about, like, how do you connect with those people, rather than simply just the our policies and messaging and things like that, because I actually do think that a lot of our policies are very popular.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we really resonate with that in terms of like, we talk a lot about this like TikTok divide, TikTok generation, where a lot of like us, a lot of people in our generation get a lot of their content and their media, and they form those thoughts and opinions off of short form content on TikTok,
Mhm.
where it's like you have an influencer and they're like going to the gym and they're talking about lifestyle, but then they're also explaining how they like Trump and like they're Republican. Like it's really an issue of messaging and communication. And so thank you for sharing like your like really helpful insights. And kind of just off of that, we would love to know like how do you think that Democrats can improve their messaging to the youth?
Well, I mean, I think we need to be finding folks like yourselves who are willing to do this, right? Who are willing to speak directly to your peers. There's nothing worse than like an older person trying to be cool and trying to sort of, like, sell something because they think that's what young people like, or, whatever that might be. And so I think, I've said this for years that, we have to let young people lead the way that is natural and comfortable for them, and it's going to look different than maybe how we've done it, the generations before us have done it, but that's okay, that's a good thing, actually. And so I really think that we need to, like, let you all be able to be yourselves, and we need to support you. I think it's really important that those of us who are in positions to help with building the infrastructure, building support, that's why I came on to be an advisor for your organization, is because I really believe in what you're trying to do, and I just want to be there for you all to help support you in doing this work. And I want you to know that you have someone who has your back, and that you're going to make mistakes. You're not always going to get it right. And that's okay. That's okay. That's a part of the trial and error and figuring this stuff out and being creative. So I think, we need to make sure that we are working directly with young people, that we are going to the places where young people are at, which is both in terms of physical spaces, like getting onto campuses, but also, like our like labor workforces and whatnot, where we're meeting people in the apprenticeships and things like that. But we also need to be meeting you in online spaces, social media spaces, and then we need to get you, make sure you have the information that you need to be able to help get the messaging out and do the organizing work. But then we just need to, like, let you do it, and support you through that, and support you through real resources as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that we've been talking about internally every time that, release a social media post. It's like, is this something that's going to appeal to us and to people on the left, or is it something that's going to appeal to everybody as a whole, right?
Mhm.
I think if people look at our Instagram, they might get confused at first and think it's a basketball page, because we have like 3 or 4 posts about basketball, like Luka Doncic the other day, or talking about, who's going to win most improved player this year in the NBA. And so it really is about just meeting people, I think, where they're at. And we're obviously so grateful to have your support. But this is something that I think we all battle with internally within SAATH, right? Is, does this post make sense? Does this not make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, then what do we do to make it make sense, right, Akil?
Yeah, and especially like in our opinion, a lot of like the values of the Democratic Party are South Asian values. And so it's like that kind of messaging issue where it's like, yes, we need content that's relatable, that relates to pop culture and also like South Asian culture, but also South Asian values. That like
Mhm.
inclusivity and the ideas of like equity are really important within like our culture and like how we work and the spaces that we're in. And that really helped us rise up within the US and kind of just using that to push our messaging, especially for people who are South Asian and lean more towards the right.
Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes, it's like you've got to hide the medicine a little bit sometimes, right? Which is, so if you have a variety of content where you're not just hitting people over the head constantly with, you know, you should do this and the Democrats say this and why don't you believe this, but you're mixing it up with some of that, the culture work and and talking about values and also having some fun and doing all of that, it's so much more likely to connect with people than when it's just sort of the same thing over and over and over. And people don't like to feel like they're being lectured at, right? They want to feel like they're engaging and that there's a personality to it and they're getting to know you all and getting to know the community as well. So I think you're right on with what you're building.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people are definitely gonna learn all my takes on basketball by the end of this, but I've always wanted a platform to talk basketball and politics, so this is like great for me. I think on that, when we've been talking about South Asians, we've been talking about the political body that I think people have to pay attention to. Um, One of the main goals here at SAATH as part of the elections wing is to make an impact for the 2026 midterm. So I guess just based off things you're seeing and the work that you've had, are there, particular states, districts, areas that you think South Asian voters could have an outsized impact in upcoming elections? And how do we target them, kind of?
Well, let me start by saying that actually I've been really excited by the results of the last few months because just on Tuesday, we had a special election for two state legislative races in Pennsylvania. And Democrats won in both of those seats and overperformed. I think one of the districts was like a plus 23 Trump
Yeah, it
district.
was. Yeah.
And, in Virginia in January, there were two special elections as well, both South Asian candidates, and they both won in red districts. I don't know exactly when this is airing, but just next week, we have the two congressional races in Florida, and then we also have a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. And, look, our community is everywhere. We are the difference makers in so many places, so many states, so many communities that it really makes a difference if our community gets activated. And so we can absolutely make a difference in these races as they're coming. Elections are happening all year round. And we have a lot of opportunities to channel the rage that people are feeling as they're watching our government get dismantled, for parts by Musk and by Trump. And so you're seeing that outrage and you're seeing people who never would have considered themselves political, getting involved and wanting to fight back. And we've got to be there for those people. And our community hasn't always been the most politically engaged. I think sometimes we've sort of followed a little bit into the model minority stereotype where it's like politics is a space where you can rock the boat. And I know that a lot of our, you know, aunties and uncles and whatnot have sort of said like just put your head down, do your work, make your money, don't get involved in politics. And I think all of this moment in history is giving all of us an opportunity to say why we need everybody to get involved. There's a number of incredible candidates that are running for races at every level of government. um, uh, India Impact, which is a political organization, they just released like their set of endorsements for South Asian candidates across the country, and I know that they'll be rolling out more. But if I'm there's at least 10 endorsements that I think they just put out this past week. So very exciting to see those opportunities, and there'll certainly be more. And I would say too, the big races that are happening this year beyond the congressional races are we have a governor's race in Virginia and a governor's race in New Jersey. And those are two places where our community is really strong and really can make a big difference. And we want to make sure, particularly in Virginia, where we can flip that from Republican to Democrat, that we're going to need all of us to go out and help.
Yeah, and we completely agree. And thank you so much for like bringing that up because we think the races in New Jersey and Virginia are super important. And that's kind of where like we see our elections wing come in. Because we're launching like a fellows program where college students and South Asian youth all around can just go to SAATH and like fill out a form, and then we could set them up with a campaign to work on. Because you're completely right. Like we don't want to be this model minority anymore and just like fit into that stereotype. It's time for the South Asian community and South Asian youth specifically to step up, like join campaigns, to go out and be more civically engaged. And we think that's super important. And it's super nice to see a lot of South Asian representation across like the career fields.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I think like on that point, Akil, like the fellow program and all these people getting involved in politics, it's not just limited to the South Asian political science majors. I think, like I think even within the major sphere, right, on college campuses, you think that you hold yourself in. But I don't know if you've noticed this, Akil, or if you have Chair Conrad, but a lot of South Asian youth across just a lot of different fields have started to get involved in politics, right? I think Republicans don't get many things right, but one of the things that Elon Musk has done is activated that link between tech and politics, right? And there's a lot of us in tech, to be frank, right? A lot of us have come from families on H-1B visas. A lot of students here still study CS, but you still see them start to get involved in politics, and that's, I think, a group we can help rise up and help give opportunities to, who can make such a amazing impact within what's going on, right? I mean, I don't know how to code a website. I can go knock on doors, but what really is needed is like a candidate website or like an Instagram ad. I don't know, couldn't tell you the first thing about Instagram's algorithm, but I can tell you what to do on it, right? But I think it's a call for all of us, regardless of what majors and what we're doing with life plans, is to just kind of get involved, like you said.
Absolutely. And really it's like a get in where you fit in. If you come from like, you love data and you would prefer to do things that are, not maybe directly with a lot of people. There's all kinds of ways to help with databases and help with cleaning up our data and helping to build websites for candidates or do things like that are super helpful. And then there's the traditional door knocking and making phone calls and helping to put on events and organize, all of that, absolutely. But you can come from any background, have any sort of we need everybody. A moment like this, when you're fighting back against fascism and authoritarianism, you need everybody. You need the mechanics and the artists and the computer science majors and the political science. You need all those people to be coming in to find a way to help and preserve democracy, to be totally frank, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as you so rightly mentioned, it's like going to affect everyone. And especially on college campuses, we are seeing a lot of the computer science majors, like their research is losing funding from like the National Science Foundation
Hmm.
or the cuts to the NIH or like hurting directly pre-med students who need research hours to go to med school. And so of course democracy is at stake, but like on such a local level, we're seeing everyone affected, especially South Asian youth in college campuses and across the board. And so kind of
Yeah.
going back to our like conversation about getting people out and getting people to knock on doors and like work on these campaigns in New Jersey and Virginia, but also across the nation. We would love to know like what strategies did you implement as chair of the Washington State Party that made voters shift to the left in the 2024 general election?
Well, I think, we've built a culture out here in Washington where people do trust they trust us. We have the longest current streak of a Democratic governor in the entire country. We passed over 4 years of having a Democratic governor. And I think that we've built that social safety net that I wish everybody has, which is we've have one of the highest minimum wages in the entire country. We have paid family medical leave. We have great overtime policy. We like, so many other places, our cities are dealing with, affordable housing and things like that. But, we certainly have done a lot of work to really build a place that people want to live in, that they want to be here. I think, from the state party, from being, the head of the state Democratic Party here, is that we've built a really strong year-round professional organizing program. We really are in community all year round. We have strong party organizations throughout the state, including in our rural districts, that are there, that are connecting with, with people in their community, connecting them to resources, making sure that they know that, we're here, that we're recruiting candidates, we're training candidates, we're doing all of that work. And I think, having a really robust state party makes a huge difference. Having the infrastructure that is able to, no matter whether, you're running people for school board or you're running them for Congress, that they have the volunteers, and the base and the data and everything ready to go to help win these elections. And, we also built a really big tent. I often say that our congressional delegation is a microcosm for the entire Democratic Party. In my state, I have Representative Pramila Jayapal, a fellow South Asian, who has been the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and represents the Seattle district, and is able to be a Bernie supporter, far progressive. But I also have Marie Glusenkamp Perez, who is in a Trump +5 district, and restarted the Blue Dog Caucus, which is a moderate caucus. And those two couldn't win in the other's district, but there's room for them, and we're proud that they are both strong Democrats that are getting us closer to a speaker, Hakeem Jeffries. And I think letting people be their authentic selves while they're running, and not having a top down Washington D.C. says you have to be like this. I think that also has made a big difference, where we've been able to get really strong candidates to run and be successful out here in this Washington.
Yeah, definitely. I think we read the points that you had released after the election about like what went left. Which, first of all, great title. That was hilarious. It's like it is impressive, right? In a year where everything trended right, to be the one state that went to the left. And I think it's lessons that we all can learn, especially at a national level. So kind of just like I think this is like the natural follow up to that question. But what is kind of the plan going forward for you in the midterms, not just in the state level, but I think also in your role as associate chair of the DNC, because like to be frank, a lot of South Asian youth are disillusioned with the DNC right now, and we've lost a lot of people. And so I think to hear from you, someone who's South Asian, but also you have a role in the DNC, would like people to help bridge that gap in a way. So I guess kind of what's the plan going forward?
Yes, well, I just got back from Washington, D.C., where I was meeting with my fellow DNC officers to talk about exactly, what you're saying, which is like, what's the path forward? And, I left actually feeling really inspired and recommitted to the work. It's still in draft form, and so I'm not quite ready to share all the specifics, but I think what we recognize is that while we have to be focused on the electoral work of winning these elections, of particularly as we're headed to the midterms, right? Everything is about winning back the House, and we have a pathway for it, and that is the best way that we're going to be able to hold off any more of the horrible stuff that's coming out of the White House. But we also have to show in this moment our fight. I think people are looking to the Democratic Party to show that we can meet the moment, that we can defend, that we can stand up for people, that we can fight back. They want to see that energy. And look, I'll be the first one to admit that, you know, we haven't always done that. We haven't always shown that fight. We have, I think there's generational shifts around seeing how to work with this Republican Party. I think the older generation wants to believe that there's still room for bipartisanship, and there's still a way to potentially get good outcomes by meeting in the middle. I think what I have seen as a millennial leader is that this Republican Party is never going to work with us, right? And when they have the power, which they do right now, right, like they never ever are going to help us or try to move to the middle. And when they don't, they also don't ever try to help us or work with us or do anything. And so we can't do that either. We have got to show our fight. We have to show that we aren't going to give them an inch, and that we're going to fight them on absolutely everything. And a lot of that work does happen electorally and through Congress and the Senate. But that work also happens through lawsuits. It happens through good journalism. It happens through mass mobilizations. And then it happens through making sure that the party is there to collect those people and help them get connected to the good work to help win these elections. So that's the work that I see in front of us. And we got to be organizing everywhere. We cannot do this like 7 battleground states and that's all that matters. It doesn't. We've got to be organizing in places that, even seem like deep red states like Missouri or Louisiana or Mississippi. Like we've got to be in these states building every chance we have so that we're not just focused on the next election, but we're focused on the next 10 years, 20 years down the road.
Yeah, exactly, and we really, like, see that on terms of on a local level, like, within families, within communities, within temples and mosques across the board, across the nation, that we really need to, like, go and talk to, like, our family members who might, like, shift to the right, especially, like, our older members, like our parents or our grandparents who are politically active, they vote, but they also vote in ways that we don't think reflect the future that we wanna see, and so that's like something that we've really like talked a lot about is like also how do you shift the narrative and kind of like create conversation points that are understandable and make sense to the like members of like older South Asian like the older South Asian generation and so it's really interesting because a lot of South Asians are in like business or in like things that people say like will help if like Trump's tax cuts like will help them and that's kind of what they see and so it's like a really hard conversation to have.
And I'd say, like, look around in this moment right now. Does it feel like Trump is helping? When you're seeing, I mean, there's all there's the federal cuts and Medicaid cuts and all of those things, but also look at who immigration is detaining. More and more it is people from our community who are getting detained for basically nothing, right? I mean, we just saw, I think was it yesterday, that there was like a tough student who just got picked up out of nowhere. There was a woman from, I think, from the Philippines, who had been here since she was 7, who got picked up for just on the street. And so, I think we have to be reminding people that, okay, maybe is a tax cut worth, you know your grandkids potentially getting, detained and, sent away because they protested at their college campus? Is a tax cut worth, you know, lack of reproductive rights that might end up in the, either a lot of harm or even death of the women in your life? Like, these are the things that we're really talking about here. And I know that sometimes it does sound very extreme, but it's real. It's very real. And it does impact everybody, not just people who are paying attention to politics. It's everybody that's being impacted. Even in a blue state, we have people that are being deeply impacted by what's happening at the federal level.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I mean, unfortunately, I've had a lot of conversations with my friends who are asking me, like, my dad's here on green card. He like owns a business. Like, what is going to happen? Or like,
Mhm.
what might happen if my like grandma comes to visit? Like, is she unable to like come? Like, how is immigration law going to change? Like, are they going to check the WhatsApp on her phone to see if she's saying anything against Trump? It's scary, right? Like
Yes.
those like free speech protections that we valued so much are just kind of being shifted away and it's impacting our families directly, which is pretty terrifying.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where the model minority, sort of like stereotype, like, it's not helping us. Even those of us who, kind of kept our heads down and done that, and tried to avoid these, they're not discriminating on that, right? Like, they're going into every community, and they are grouping all of us together. It's black and brown are there's a solidarity there because they're targeting all of us, and particularly if there are sort of visa issues and things like that. They're coming right for us, for our people.
Yeah, I think the head down point is like a great one, right? I distinctly remember it was before this 2024 election happened. I think we all go to Uncle Auntie's house and we hang out and have these conversations. And somehow the election was brought up. I think it just happened sort of naturally. And the room was full of people who weren't going to vote for Kamala Harris. And it came down to a lot of questions about the tax cuts and all that. But people had just equated a better life for some reason
Mhm.
with a Trump administration. It was pre-COVID, and I think a return back to that is very hard, but it also scares us to try to fight for that at the the same time, right?
Mhm.
So I don't think putting our head down is ever the answer, and that's like really why we have SOTH as a whole, right?
Yeah, and I mean, as Rohan said, we should not put our heads down. And this kind of like jumps into another question where it's like we interact, right, with people from our community all the time who voted for Trump that are conservative, especially like, fiscally conservative. They want tax cuts. They think that like deregulation is like overall healthier for economy because, they own businesses and kind of that's how they made it. And so we would love to know like what do you think the role is of South Asian youth in shifting political attitudes within their families and communities?
Yes, well, okay, so one of my favorite sort of organizing actions of the last couple of years is it was during it was in Georgia during Warnock's race, where um a group of Asian American leaders basically designed a program where they were feeding talking points to folks like yourselves, younger Asian leaders, and they were sending them in to hack their family WhatsApp chats. And so they were basically saying, like, okay, everybody has, like, and you all know probably, right? It's like there's the WhatsApp family chats that like cross state borders, and sometimes even there's family members in, other countries. But, there's a lot of spaces where people are like, they're doing family updates, but sometimes there's talks about politics. And, in our community, sometimes it's about like, oh, did you know more people are going to talk about Modi than they might even talk about what's happening right here in the United States. And so what they did was they gave them talking point, and they're like, okay, like go stir up that, go pose this question, like go have this fight. Here's the talking points for that, and it really made a difference. We saw that there were increased numbers of AAPI voters across generation that were voting for Warnock in that election cycle, and it's still I go back to that over and over again of just like number one, creativity. It's something a little bit different outside of the box. I love that. Number two, it's understanding the culture. So like, not every community that would make sense for, but in our community, that's a lot of the ways in which families kind of organize and communicate with one another. And so there was it was led by people who understood the community, who understood how, that kind of information could get dispersed, and then it was really in this very sort of you'll hear about relational organizing. It was very much about people to people, family member to family member, having those types of conversations. And so, I think some of it is that we have to be I think our young people are typically a little bit more progressive than our older generations, but being willing to have those conversations, being willing to stand up and say, like, auntie or grandma, like, hey, this is actually impacting my life. Like, here's how, you're worried about tax cuts, but like, I'm worried about whether I'm going to be able to get a job. I'm worried about whether or not I'm going to be able to stay in this country and, continue to do this work. I'm worried about, my partner being able to get the healthcare that they need, like those types of things, and being able to have those conversations that sometimes are very taboo, and it takes a lot of courage and bravery to sort of step forward and to do it, but it really does and can make a huge difference. And I've seen story after story where, young people have turned around their parents. In my own family, not the same, but my own family, my grandfather was a, sort of a traditional Republican, and my mother was a real hippie. And my mom, in her very flower child sort of way, finally got him to see that, he didn't need to be this fiscally conservative Republican, but that there was a lot of good that was happening through like the civil rights movement and things like that, and changed his view of the world because his daughter was pushing him to do it. And so I think that, there's a lot of those types of stories where, you know, we can organize in those ways and make a difference.
Yeah. It's really funny that you mentioned the Georgia WhatsApp group, because that was part of the things that I did in high school growing up for the 2020 election. Like, we had signs that said "Bases for Ossoff and Warnock" with the dates of the runoff on it. The WhatsApp hacking group chats and stuff like that. I like vividly remember that a few of us had gotten kicked out of some of the other WhatsApp group chats, and so we had to find a way back in under like a different number or whatever through somebody else. But it really is about, getting in these spaces, getting infiltrating. And it's like, once people just have to be met where they are. I don't think we
Yep.
can reasonably expect them to come to us. We have to go to them. And
Yes.
that's kind of the broader theme I think that I picked up from our chat today is that we just have to reach people where they are. Right, Akil?
Yes.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned infiltrating WhatsApp, right? Because, like, that's where people like, my grandma is convinced of anything, right? Like, if you send, like, a long post, you could convince her that, like, XYZ gives you cancer, and it's, like, it's really scary, but, I mean, that's the fact of the matter is that's how a lot of South Asians get their information, and so,
Mhm.
it's not a matter of, like, should we? It's a matter of necessity, right? That
Yes.
this is where like people are getting their information, we have to infiltrate those spaces. So kind of
Yeah.
like to our generation, right? On TikTok and watching these short form contents, that's their generation's version of TikTok in a way of where they're getting their information and kind of like what they trust. And
Mhm.
so I think that like was incredibly strategic and smart, and is something that like the Democratic Party and us like as an organization should really learn from. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of on that same vein, our organization as a whole is kind of targeted on that, right? The Instagram, the Substack, this YouTube video, hopefully, and these podcast clips. It's really to help people meet them in their spaces. I mean, I would post clips of this in my WhatsApp group chats, right? Specifically, maybe I'll send it to that one group chat we got kicked out of, right? Like, hey guys, mentioned y'all. But with that, I kind of just wanted to ask you. What about SAATH appealed to you on our original call? To provide some background for people who are listening, we kind of just cold emailed you, and we're like, "Hey, like you've been an amazing person for representation. The vice president for the DNC chair race was something that we had looked into, and the state of Washington, and the work that you've done there. So, I just kind of wanted to ask, what about SAATH appealed to you on our original call, and what message you have for South Asian politics currently who may not have the impact of the youth and what our organization can do for them.
Well, I mean, first, I'm someone who, the only reason why, it's important to have roles like this is so that you can kick down doors and bring more people behind you. And so, I want you all in these spaces. I need you in these spaces. I can't do this work alone. And so, when, you all sent your email, it was an immediate yes of at least I wanted to hear you out and get to know you. And then, I told you at the time, you all put together one of the best sort of pitches that I've seen in my years of doing this work. I really respected and appreciated how you all talked about the different sort of generations of youth, the different ways in which young people have had different experiences and therefore engage in different ways. I thought that that was a really nuanced perspective that I haven't always heard in these youth spaces, not just South Asian, but in any of these youth organizing spaces. And I really appreciated the way that you were talking about, young people who had to experience like going to school during COVID versus young people who were kind of out and were starting to work already. And then, your passion for this, the fact that you all have really identified that we don't have an organization like SAATH that is really specifically focused on South Asian youth and really getting them more politically engaged. And so, I'm all in. I hope that more folks come and join SAATH and get involved, and we'll get you plugged in, and we'll make sure that you get connected to, whatever you want to do. You want to help with the Democratic Party, you want to work on a campaign, you want to do data entry, something, like, we'll figure it out and we'll help you get connected to all of this. And I'm here for the journey with you all, and just very proud already and very excited to see where it takes all of us.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, thank you so much. And I mean, again, you're such an inspiration for us. And we really appreciate you coming in, like giving us advice and telling us like your insights. And I mean, it's all super helpful. But that is a wrap on today's conversation with the incredible Chair Conrad. So thank you so much for reminding us why South Asians belong at every table where decisions are made. And if this episode got you fired up and ready to take some political action, share it with your community, your family WhatsApp group, your neighborhood auntie, everyone you can. Use your voice and remember you always have the power to create change. Join SAATH.